Why is it that some students would rather stay stuck than let anyone see that they need help? I'm Paul Garrison, and I'm the owner of the Lil Will Learning Company. And before I started this company, I was a public school teacher for 17 years. And for 14 of those years, I ran an after school program known as the Roos Shakespeareans, where I helped 5th and 6th grade students put together full productions of Shakespeare's plays that were combined with music, dancing, lighting, all the above. And for all that work, I received a Jefferson Award in the San Francisco Bay Area. And today I want to go over why it is that even when you have capable students, they will still refuse help even when they know they need it. And the reason why could be from embarrassment to trust issues to their identity of themselves. And then we'll also go over how you as a parent can help them through that. Because even if students know they need help, it's what comes with that help that they don't want. You may think you're offering that child help, but for them, what they're feeling is they're being embarrassed for something that they can't do. So, from the perspective of the adult, whether you're the parent or the teacher, when we say, hey, do you need help? What we're really meaning is, hey, I can see you're struggling. I might know something that's going to help you with this. I've seen this before. I've done this before. Let me help you with that. But for the child, what they hear is, hey, you're not really good at this thing. Hey, you haven't really practiced this enough. And you know what? Not only that, but I'm going to help you, but in front of all the other students here or people around you so they can kind of see that you're not as skilled as this. Now, of course, obviously, that's never the intention, but a child could interpret it that way. And no child wants to feel like they're not good at something or that they're lacking in something. And so, of course, they just feel embarrassment. And that can be difficult for them to take, even though they may know that they need help with something. Now, there's kind of a short term and long term answer to this, but ultimately, if you're dealing with a child who is avoiding help due to the embarrassment it might bring to them, it's really, you want to not have that spotlight on them. So, short term, if you can try to find a way to give them the answer without spotlighting the fact that they don't know what to do here or they may not be as skilled there. And of course, there's a longer term answer of you have to kind of build that trust to begin with. But the thing is, for a child, it's not that they really are refusing the help. What they're refusing is really the attention or the spotlight on the fact that they may not be as skilled as something. So, how can you tell that a student needs help, but they're clearly avoiding feeling embarrassed? Well, I always say, look at their eyes. Here's what I mean by that. When I was working with students after school in the Shakespeare program, and I had the guitarists who I would work with, and they would practice songs. Eventually, they'd play the song in front of the whole cast, and I would be backstage, and I would tell some of the students that, hey, watch the guitarist's eyes. What I had them look for is the guitarists who really had it down, their eyes were just laser locked in. They had almost like this boring face of just, and I would always kind of tease in a playful way, but I'd say, that's actually the face we're looking for and the eyes we're looking for because it means they're totally focused on what they're doing and they know what they're doing. They're just trying to focus on executing it. But then you would see some students who were up there playing guitar, they hadn't really memorized their parts yet, and their eyes were looking everywhere except their guitar. They were looking at the other students, looking at the other musicians, looking at me, see if I would notice. And it's the same thing in a classroom or even at home with your child. If their eyes are looking at you to see if you notice or looking everywhere else to see what else is going on or if anyone else notices they're struggling or maybe even looking at other students' papers. I remember I had one student one year refuse to ask for help, but I could clearly tell they were struggling and they were looking everywhere but their paper. Looked at their classmates, see what they were doing, looked at me to see what I was going to do because I think they knew I could see what was going on. I could see there was nothing on their paper. So here's how I handle that. I handle that by basically saying to the whole class all of a sudden, like, hey, everyone, listen up. And I would explain the solution or the answer to a particular problem or to a skill they were learning, and I would address it to the whole class. And by doing that, I was not putting a spotlight on that individual student, but in a way, I was still answering their question without going up to them and asking, "Hey, do you need help?" Because when you say, "Do you need help?" you're putting a spotlight on them anyway. So again, I would just say, "Oh, I had a student from a previous class who struggled with this. Let me show you this really quickly, just in case anyone's struggling with this right now." And I probably answered it for more than just that one student, but it's just give them the answer to their question without putting a spotlight on them, and that helps them avoid embarrassment. If it's at home with your child and you don't have the luxury of a classroom of students, just say, "Oh, when I was your age, I kind of struggle with this, so here's what I would do." Oh, again, just not putting a spotlight on the fact that they are struggling with something. Now, what's a convenient phrase to help someone maybe hide and avoid work? Well, it's the phrase, "I'm thinking." Now, look, to be fair, some students really do need time to think. And, of course, they need that time to produce something, whether it is an answer or whether it's the next step in a process. That's legitimate. I'm not talking about that. I mean students who will use the phrase, "I'm thinking, I'm analyzing, I'm planning," in order to avoid work and avoid admitting that they need help with something. And I, one year, had a student who did that all the time. And again, they would constantly use that phrase, and then they would just keep their eye locked on me as I walked around the classroom looking for students who may have needed help with something. Now, the thing about that phrase is this. All aside that, yes, at times I'm thinking it's a legitimate excuse. We're talking about the times where a student's using it to not get their work done or not even get the help they need. Instead of asking the phrase, "Do you need help?" I would just kind of sit down next to the student and I would ask them, "Show me what you've done so far. Walk me through what you've done so far." It did help them remove the defensiveness for just a little bit. And as they walked me through the process of what they have done so far, I would kind of say, "Hey, well, here's the next step you want to do, or here's what we're trying to get to. So here's what you should do in this instance here." Now, I guess the key thing with that is by having them walk through, it helps them see maybe exactly where they did get stuck. But the other truth is this. The phrase, "I'm thinking," if that really is true, eventually it should produce something. And so to make sure that a child or a student knows that thinking is fine as long as it produces something. But when it comes to avoiding work, we have to get past that. And by showing them that next step, that helps them with that next step in the process. Even if you know that this child needs help, if you press them more, there's a good chance that they just shut you down even more and maybe even build up a bigger wall. Now, I think to some extent, all adults and maybe even teachers, we understand that to an extent. But yet, I mean, I've made this mistake before, even knowing this in my head. So it's hard to execute correctly. There are times, and maybe it just takes practice, where if a child is saying like, "No, no, no, I'm fine," and they're not accepting any help, and if you even give them a little bit of help, not even asking, "Do you need help?" but just maybe give them a little bit of answer here or there, and then you can kind of sense they're shutting down even more. There are times where, you're just going to have to accept that, give them the space, give a little breathing room, but I I don't want to phrase this as you're ignoring it. You give them a little bit of a break at that moment, but then come back to it a little bit later and go over it with them when they're maybe not quite as defensive or not quite as avoidant as they were before. And sometimes that is the right answer. Always choosing to press more could just push them more away for the time. And so sometimes you just need to learn to back off and come back to it later. And I've found when I've done that, it leads to maybe delayed, I don't want to use the word success, delayed success, but it ends up being more beneficial to the child later anyway, because they're more receptive in that moment. Now, another harsh truth is that some students are just less likely to accept help from some adults. And the reason why is because they haven't built that trust with them. So one year, I had a student in my classroom, and he was asking many questions, and he was, doing better, and I complimented him for the amount of questions he was asking. And a little bit later, not in front of the whole class, I asked him if I was answering his questions for him and all that. And he was saying yes, and he said he really appreciated it because he would never ask questions in his previous class. And I was genuinely curious. So I asked why, and he said essentially that if questions were asked, they were never really answered, and it just didn't seem like the teachers he had were very interested in answering his questions anyway. And I don't want to get into too much detail with this, but essentially, whenever he did try to ask a question, it wasn't answered, or the teacher was frustrated with him. And so he kind of felt that these teachers, these adults, did not really have his best interest at heart. And so this is a really important point. It takes time to build a relationship with the child and to build that trust. And that's that might be the reason why they don't accept the help to begin with. And basically, by building trust with that child and building that relationship with that child and building that over time, it means that they're probably more likely to not only ask for help, but then um, accept the help that's being offered. And it's important to not skip that step. Now, the smart kid may be the most terrified of looking confused. If you have a child who's always been the smart kid in their class, always the excellent student, the exceptional student, look, at some point, eventually, they're going to ask for help. They're going to need help. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But if their whole identity is wrapped around the fact that they've been the smart, excellent, exceptional student, and then they finally get to a point where they're confused or lost, they just might be reluctant to ask for help because they don't want to lose that identity. They don't want to lose the image of being the smart kid in class. That basically they don't want to be ridiculed or made fun of for like, oh, you're finally asking for help. You're finally asking a question. I've seen that a few times when I was teaching in the classroom, and basically it's a tougher one because it is another situation where it depends on how many years they've had that image or that identity kind of built into them, that it might take that long for them to kind of be okay with being a bit more vulnerable and asking for help and admitting that something is confusing them. Because, of course, there's times where they're going to try to figure it out on their own, and maybe they do figure it out on their own. And that's how they've kind of always dealt with that situation. But I've had a few students who, again, had that reputation. They were great students, but then when they did finally need help, when they were finally struggling with something, they were reluctant to ask in front of the whole class in front of other students because they didn't want to lose that image. And for this one, you got to give them some time. When they do finally ask for help, it's to praise the fact that they have the humility and the understanding enough to say, "Hey, I do need help, and please help me with this." And hopefully that they see that nothing bad happens when they do ask for help. Hopefully, no one like makes fun of them or teases them. And I think as adults, whether we're the teacher or the adult, to make sure that we create that environment where it is okay to ask that question, ask for that help. Now, if you want more questions asked of you from students or children, well, then you have to respect the questions you're already getting. How we react to when students or children ask us questions, it will determine whether or not they ask more questions afterward. So here's what I mean. I think a lot of us go, well, obviously, we need to make sure we're respectful when they ask questions. But when it's Thursday afternoon or Friday afternoon of the week and you're tired and exhausted, and the kids and the students are all over the place, your patience can run thin. So it really comes down to, well, how are you in those moments? So when children ask us questions, do we get annoyed? Do we get frustrated? Do we give like a, like, I've answered this one before. Why are you asking me again? Or, come on, you weren't even paying attention yesterday. That reaction, even once or twice, it can basically deter a student from ever asking a future question because they kind of think, well, one time when I was vulnerable enough to ask a question, well, you just got annoyed with me, so why would I ever ask a question again? And that's a hard truth to accept as adults or as teachers because again, it only takes once or twice with that type of reaction to make students not feel safe enough to ask questions. So, obviously, we want to have the right answer ready for them to help them, but just as important is how we respond when we are asked those questions. How you answer one of their questions will determine whether or not they ask the next one. So, a really simple strategy that I used was that when students asked me questions in class, I would make sure that everyone else was paying attention and being very respectful. They couldn't, you know, fiddle around with their pencil or be distracted by something. I was trying to show the student that asked the question that their question was so important. I was willing to freeze the rest of the class in order to make sure their question was answered. I would answer their question as best I could, as thoroughly as I could, and as honestly as I could, because every once in a while, there are some times where you don't know the answer. And then after I answered their question, I would simply ask them, hey, did I answer your question? And hopefully the answer was yes, but if they said no, not really, then I would proceed to answer again in a different way to help them understand. Now, the key thing is I also try to be as consistent with that as possible. So if that was day 1, I also had to make sure that day 175 also looked like that. And if you have hopefully an image in your mind of when I'm asked a question, how am I going to respond? How will I provide the answer? How will I know that I've given them that answer? I think the better a process you have with that, it will result in more students being willing to ask for help and accepting the help that's offered to them. Now, if you're only using the phrase, do you need help? Honestly, that can feel like a trap to a defensive student. Because think about what do you need help is really asking them. It's really kind of saying like, hey, I can tell you're lost. I can tell you're struggling. Everyone else here can see it too, but I'll give you some help. It's like they're embarrassed. They don't want to admit they need help. That's why you get a defensive answer like, I'm fine. So a better way to approach it would be to, hey, let's see where you're stuck. Walk me through what you've done so far, and let's see where you're stuck. Or why don't you explain to me what you do understand, and that will help us kind of see which part you're struggling with. And you and you also don't want to put a spotlight on the student, but if you can really pinpoint it down to here's the exact step or part that you're getting stuck up on, that's better than the generic phrase of do you need help? So again, have them walk through what they do understand. Have them repeat the process of what they're doing so far. Maybe you can see the step where they are getting stuck. And again, have your answer ready, and the way you deliver it does matter because if this is the 500th time you're explaining multiplication to them, hopefully you're not showing it with disgust across your face as well. So in the moment, always lower the pressure, but long term, build that relationship, build that trust. When you can tell a student needs help and maybe they don't want to ask for it and they're just saying, no, 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 I'm fine, don't worry. Or they're doing something to avoid asking for the help, whether it's due to embarrassment or trust or the image they have of themselves. Try to lower the pressure to get them to a point where they'll at least accept the help or accept the answer in some way. Don't put a spotlight on them. That helps. But again, the long-term answer, you do have to build a relationship with that child. You have to build that trust. And the way that's done is over many, many days, weeks, months, years of kind of showing that when a question is asked, that an answer is given to the best of your ability, and it's given in a way where it's calm, it's understanding, it's not frustrated, it's not, I've answered this before, what's wrong with you? Or, oh, I don't have time for this. And even if you don't have time to answer their question fully, if you can essentially say something along the lines of, I can't answer that fully right now, but I'll answer in more detail later. And then if you do follow through with that promise, that helps kids a lot with trusting that you do have their best interests in mind. So again, in the moment, try to lower the pressure, but then long term, build that trust and relationship with that child. So the truth is, many students at some point, they're going to need help. And whether it's due to embarrassment, or whether it's due to trust, or whether it's due to self identity, there's some reason why they're reluctant to ask for the help. It's not that they don't want the help. They don't want what comes with it. Being made fun of by their classmates or other people, or maybe even adults. Or just the fact that they've seen other teachers or adults not really be respectful when answering questions, or they don't want to feel like they're losing their identity as the excellent student. Whatever it may be, find a way to lower that pressure, find a way to not put such a spotlight on them, at least not in a way that brings up that embarrassment or brings up their self-identity. And long term, build that trust, build that relationship, and it will mean that a student's more likely to ask the next question. Or when you do finally offer help, they're probably much more willing to accept that offer of help. And those little details, I think, will create students who grow, become better students, better people, and improve overall. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. And until next time, take care.